Folks, this is Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host, and we have with us a returning guest, friend of the show, Brother John. Hey, go to my website, booktalkwithcorbin.com, and you'll see the other interviews I've done with this, not just this public servant, but this thinking public servant. I think, when you read people like Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato, and they talk about the importance of, of wisdom and intelligence being in public service, they're talking about people like Brother John. I mean, he's the living example.
Thank you, Corbin.
You bet, brother. And thank you for taking time out of your family and all and be with us for these, next 15, 20 minutes here.
Mm-hmm.
Brother, I'm beat. I've been working like a dog, working with my students, but I had to do this. And I'm referring to this article done by Dr. Ricky Jones. He's the head of the Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville. He wrote this article, Courier Journal, October 31, 2021. And the title was, "Beware, Very Fine Racists May Be Coming to a School Board Near You."
Right.
And
yeah.
Go ahead, brother.
I was going to say, I read that article. It's got a lot of, starting with the headline, a lot of, I think, improper comparisons, between perhaps some extreme racist members of our society at large and people going to the school boards who are just concerned parents. I think it's intended to be an inflammatory article, is the way I read it.
Yeah, I read it, and I have to agree with you as far as he makes a real stretch in connecting, groups who are on the line of the Ku Klux Klan, flat out white supremacist, anti-Semitic, violent, with, as you said, parents who are just saying, hey, I don't like this. I don't feel comfortable with this. We don't need this in the public school system. And let me quote to you here at the bottom, his last paragraph. He says, oh, wait a minute, this is a paragraph that's in the middle. "The same people and politicians who may not openly embrace the Ku Klux Klan, Proud Boys, or lesser known racist groups will very quickly push legislation to, as Republican State Representative Jennifer Decker of Kentucky put it, ban the teaching of critical race theory and all of its progeny." Whoa.
Yeah. I think trying to brand parents that are concerned about what their children are being taught in the classroom, they're trying to approach the elected school board members, ask questions, express their concern, and to try to somehow in an article tie those people into the Ku Klux Klan, I think it should be silly for most thinking people to do that. It's easy to name call and try to marginalize people that are trying to have a discussion with you. And I think anytime you have an elected body of people who are spending close to $2 billion of the taxpayers' money to educate our children, and certainly the parents' right to get in there and ask them what's being taught and why it's being taught, and ask their questions, and they're getting the cold shoulder. Just some of the protests and complaints at school board meetings. The FBI came and tried to brand these parents as domestic terrorists and follow them. You probably saw the recent gubernatorial election in Virginia, where the Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat candidate, said that it was not the parents' choice as to what their children were taught. The schools would decide what they would be taught. And that's not the America we all grew up in. Parents are responsible for raising their children. They're not the government's children. They're our children. In fact, the government's not paying for it. The taxpayers are paying for it. So I think this is an assault on the very roots of democracy to suggest to people, you just hand over your children, we'll train them, we'll teach them, we'll indoctrinate them with whatever we think is good, and we really don't want your input. And if, by the way, if you do complain, you'll be branded as a domestic terrorist and compared in the newspaper to Ku Klux Klan members. I just think that's intentionally inflammatory and very untrue.
Haven't there been some other totalitarian societies who basically did what you just say, hey, your children belong to us, hand them over to us, we'll educate them in the proper way. And if you don't like it, tough beans. I mean, isn't that what we saw with the Soviet Union?
Absolutely.
Germany?
What we saw with the Soviet Union is what we see with communist China, with what they called the Cultural Revolution under Mao in the 60s. They killed millions and millions of people. And they basically separated children from their families, ripped them away from their history, the 5,000-year history of their country, their religion, and their parents. And multiple publications of Marxists and communists say the way that we win is by getting to the children, indoctrinating the children, separating them from their parents, from their family structure, from their religion and beliefs, and basically have the state become their parent. The state indoctrinate them with what to believe, when to believe it. And even today, communist China, they have got millions of dissidents, religious practitioners that are in various forms of detention and jail, and bad things happening over there in China. But you're not really allowed to speak up. You're not allowed to complain. You're not allowed to question.
Right, right. And it's interesting here in this Ricky Jones article, what you just articulated, what has actually happened, what was documented with the Soviet Union and China and Nazi Germany and all. He says this is what American conservatives are trying to do in the United States today.
Yeah, it's another false equivalency, I think, in this article by Ricky Jones. He thinks by just comparing someone to some other names, it will make them the same. He suggests that conservatives are trying to silence advocates of critical race theory the same way the communists silenced dissidents in their country. I think that's just not true. I was a couple of nights this week, I've had the pleasure of being with a young man from Ukraine. And as you know, Ukraine was part of the Soviet bloc up until the Berlin Wall fell. And he's got very interesting stories about their young nation trying to live out democracy and having the freedom to speak out for the first time, and religious freedom in their country. And it's a new thing to them. It's very refreshing to see that. But for most of his young life, he lived in the shadow of the Kremlin, where they were not allowed to have their opinion. They were not allowed to openly advocate for their religion. Not allowed to speak up. And that's the bedrock of America, the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
You can't infringe the right of the people to freely assemble, you can't infringe the right of the press, free speech, and the right to redress government with your grievances. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what parents are doing at the school board meeting, is trying to address the government for redress of their grievances, and they're being denied that and name called for it.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned, that young man talking about Ukraine and how for the first time in many, many years, decades, they were able to, they sort of have to get into the habit, I guess you might say, of being able to evangelize, share ideas, freely talk, etc. I one time listened to a British lady talk about freedom of speech in Britain. And she brought up the United States, and she was just trying to say, well, yeah, we have freedom of speech in Britain. We have freedom of speech there's freedom of speech in the United States. But the difference with the United States seems to be Americans just seem to have it in their DNA to reject someone saying, no, you can't say that.
Absolutely, we do.
And when I thought about that, I said to myself, boy, she's got a point. It's just embedded in our culture and our mindset. Well, yeah, I can't stand you. I don't like what you're saying, but daggone it, I will go to war to protect your right to say it.
Exactly.
And people mean that. People mean that.
Yeah. Somebody might not even want to say it until somebody says you can't say that. And that just gets under your skin as an American. This is a free country that says we got a right to free speech.
Yeah.
And and that was one of the essential problems in the American Revolution. Those people who were peacefully speaking out against the British government were getting in trouble. They were getting jailed. They were losing their jobs. They were having their assets, seized. Mm. That's the way the Crown was repressing people in the 1770s. And the more they repressed, the madder people got. And I think that's been passed down to us culturally that if somebody tells you you can't do this because I say so, that puts the hair up on the back of your neck and you're ready to push back.
And you mentioned, about, at that time, the way the Crown dealt with is one of the way they dealt with was that, hey, I'm going to take away your means to be able to take care of yourself and take care of your family. And I can't tell you, brother, the number of times people have told me in confidence, I'm scared to articulate my conservative views or libertarian views. I'm scared to speak out against certain things, the whole woke stuff. I might lose my job.
Right. And I know people who have lost their job for speaking out. You first people get put in Facebook jail, they call it, for having an opinion that's not popular with the technical oligarchs that are trying to rule our society. Then have a Fortune 500 employer decide that you can't work here, you lose a position, you lose pay and promotion. And it's very subtle, but they will put you out for saying things that are against the party line. And I've got multiple friends that have suffered economic harm as a result of that. Mm-hmm. Just for speaking their mind, not for being burning down buildings or throwing bombs, any threats of violence, but just for speaking their mind.
Right. Yeah. Well, you use the phrase party line, and that's it. I used to be part of the socialist movement, and if you in the groups I were in, like if they had a strong position on Cuba, and you would say something like, "Well, I don't know, man. I don't think it's right that Cuba censors." Or you went against the party line, you're out. You're
absolutely
out.
Right.
They'll and on the way out, you are Satan, Lucifer, and a demon all wrapped up in one.
That's right. A lot of people don't realize that Kentucky has a huge Cuban population, Cuban exiles, about 30,000 in Kentucky. Started settling here, and very strong conservative bunch. They're a religious bunch, but they, even though they're Cuban exiles, there are Cuban government spies in Kentucky that keep an eye on those folks, and they are afraid to speak out because they have family members back in Cuba that will be persecuted for what they might say here as a free American. These are some of the best Americans I know. They're naturalized American citizens. They love this country.
Yes.
Screaming from the rooftops, what are you guys doing? You're bringing in the destructive socialist communist system that we fled in rafts to get away from Cuba for. Why are you bringing this hell to your own doorstep? Don't you see what happens? And it's often said the only people who are fans of communism are people who have never lived under it. You won't find a lot of people who've lived under communism that care for it much at all.
Oh, brother, that is so true. I'll never forget when I was in college, I was a big supporter of the Patriotic Front, ZANU and ZAPU, and in Zimbabwe. When ZANU-PF took power, I was in Zimbabwe soon afterwards. Old college friend of mine was there. She had married a Zimbabwean. And brother, it wasn't, I was at a party and I was excited. Oh, we gained this great victory. We're going to move towards socialism in Zimbabwe. I was asking a lot of questions and the people weren't answering my questions. So after the party, my host told me, he said, Corbin, they were scared to answer your questions because they thought you were a government agent.
Right.
So wait a minute. Here's this great liberating force. Why would you be scared to talk about the victory and to celebrate the victory like that? But right. they were scared, man. They told me. And then later on, years later, my friend, she was doing everything possible to get out of Zimbabwe. It was horrible, brother. The political repression, the economic chaos and decay. It was horrible. And Mugabe, down to the end, he was Mr. Socialism. God, Lord. Find me one Zimbabwean that supported Mugabe. I guarantee you he hadn't been home. He wasn't home under the Mugabe rule.
Yeah.
Purdue again. Yeah, you make a good point on that one. Brother, let me finish off by reading this last quote here in this article by Dr. Ricky Jones. Quote, the message here is that you shouldn't just worry about overt racists marching around screaming Jews will not replace us or beating Black people in the streets. You better pay attention to the more sophisticated ones seeking to colonize your local school boards and other institutions